Hi, Lawrence.
Hello.
How are
I
you this fine day?
I think I see your ceiling.
Oh, oh, no, what you're seeing is a little cover I made for my camera on my iMac.
Uh, um, for what it's worth, the Mac is one of the few programs that they can't hijack the camera because it goes through Apple security. And if you haven't
Oh,
given permission to use it, uh, nothing can, you have to actually authorize permission to use it.
well, that's good to know. Of course, I am one of those that has that really old computer, so mine is a late 2013 model.
Ah, well, that one doesn't have a security chip.
Nope, it does not. Been thinking about, um, there's programs that you can use to put on an operating system that isn't intended to be on there. And I've been thinking about that. You can take them clear up to the latest one, but
You realize that in order to do that, you have to completely disable security.
just while it's happening,
Nope.
oh, it's
Completely, totally disable security. So it's
yeah.
probably the worst possible choice.
Okay. Well, darn.
Yeah, I had a friend who did that, and he was also a computer security person, and he was very proud of himself. And I said, "I bet I can get into your computer with it locked." And he said, "No, you can't." And I said, "I've got all kinds of security on this." And about a minute later, um, he was very sad.
Uh, okay. Well, I thought it seemed like a too good to be true, but apparently it's done quite a bit. So
Yeah.
did you get a chance to try out photo pills?
Did
That
I?
app, that photo pills, that app that
I saw it, and they wanted money, so I couldn't
oh,
even.
did they?
Yeah,
Uh,
they don't even have a free demo, and so I saw what it said it did, but the write up was marketing. It wasn't really specific enough for me to know what it was they meant. I'm
uh,
I'm one of these people who don't I don't like advertising that is just marketing. I
uh,
prefer having specifics, and I could find not enough specific to really know what it is that it did. I mean,
they sent. Oh, go ahead.
if you watch the drug ads that they have during the nightly news, they've got these people wandering around in these pastel colored suits, singing and dancing along the beach, and everything's bright and sunny. And then they list the side effects, and you could die 500 different ways from this pill, but it's still bright and sunny.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We
And
thought that all of them say, ask your doctor, ask your doctor. So
yes,
we thought about
absolutely.
writing them all down and then taking them to our doctor just as a joke and say, do I need this? uh, Yep, they send me photo pills. Send me at least two um, training things a month, I would say, and they'll have people that are specialists in this subject or that subject as far as photos concerned, and they're I don't usually watch them. Photo pills for me, I really have gotten out of photography much lately, and but it's really in depth. It's so in depth that it's pretty much over my head.
Well, in my case, I have a lot of um, I do a lot of photography,
Hmm.
um, and it's just that in my case, I'm just dubious about a lot
Yeah,
of the things that people say that they're going to do,
yeah.
and um, so I didn't get enough of a feel for what it was talking about to decide that I wanted to actually try that.
Was it expensive? Do you remember, or was it pretty
I
cheap?
wasn't that much, but I got several hundred apps. Do I really
Me
want to
too.
spend money on a bunch of other apps. So
Right, yeah. Yep.
and if you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm belatedly making a sign-in sheet.
I kind of figured that might be it.
And I don't know what it is that I did, but it's not useful.
I didn't expect to be into this session tonight. We were going to go to the music in the park, but at 95 is what my temperature, and that's down to 93 here at the house. But it's a little too hot to be sitting out there at Carrie Blake Park.
I've given up on making a form.
I'm sorry, I keep bothering you. Go ahead, and I won't bother you.
No, I'm in the words of Star Trek, I'm emotionally compromised right now. My spouse is ill, and it's hard for me to keep track of what it is that I'm supposed to be doing.
No.
And apparently I triggered some program that is doing weird things. And I need to make it go away. It's allowing me to draw on the screen, and I don't want to draw on the screen. Stop annotating the screen. Okay. Yeah, my spouse is not feeling well, and I'm a little bit distressed.
Yeah. Sorry to hear that.
Anyway, we start off with the questions and answers, and you probably want questions other than how hot is it inside my house right now? And apparently the answer is it's 78. So
yeah, mine's 75. Luckily, I got a heat pump that does a fine job of keeping it cool in here.
Well, the thermostat is about as far from where I am as possible, and that doesn't help. So I might be doing a better job, except that it thinks that I must be comfy, and I'm not. Any questions that have nothing to do with my thermostat? No questions?
Well, if there's none, then what kind of a thermostat do you know? I'm just kidding.
I have a question for everybody else. Apple came up with a bunch of updates last week. And did you update your iPads and your iPhones and Macs and such? I don't.
Yes.
If you want to know what it looks like, because they didn't appear on the security update list, I think it's the Apple usual preparing the regular operating systems to be compatible with whatever's forthcoming. They usually have a few adjustments so that they can slide into the new world without causing trouble for people who aren't immediately sliding into the new world. And there didn't seem to be much security content to the most recent updates. They seem to be mostly trying to prepare things for what's coming out, probably September, October. So I didn't see anything particularly drastic. The people who like to speculate on what Apple is going to be introducing notice some things like new sizes of screens options. If you're a programmer and you go into the code, there are new sizes of screen options and hints about new cameras and so on and so forth. But I tend to discount that because Apple will include support for things that they're prototyping, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to introduce things. For example, several years ago, there was elements talking about the possible solid-state Samsung camera that Apple never adopted. They stuck it in the prototyping code because they had some people who were going to be testing it, but they decided against it, and they stuck with Sony sensors in the in Macs and iPhones. So I constantly get asked, I probably was asked like a dozen questions this past week about rumors. I tend to discount the rumors. I'm not interested because I'm much more interested in the hardware that people are actually using rather than fictitious hardware that might come along the road. So if you're interested in rumors, I don't tend to pay that much attention to them. I pay much more attention to the security rumors. For example, if you have an Intel based Mac, there is a vulnerability outside there with Intel processors that allows you to basically, if you have physical access to a Windows machine and you have a specially prepared USB drive, you can compromise it in about a minute. And there's speculation that you could do the same thing on the Mac side. And I've been paying quite a bit of attention to that because I do have a couple Intel Macs. And the answer is no. The way in which it works in the Windows world, that type of software structure doesn't even exist on the Mac side. So yes, it might have the same CPU, but there's no vector that you can use to get into it. So I do pay attention to that kind of rumor, but not to unannounced product rumors. I remember when the AirPod Max, that huge headphones that cost $700, there were rumors that Apple was going to introduce these $700 headphones, and I thought, that's got to be bogus. And when they actually came out, I was a little bit surprised. So sometimes the rumors are true, but for the most part, that's not something I pay attention to. Any other questions, comments, criticisms of?
I have a question. My wife has an M1 iPad Pro, and several times in the past week while she's watching Netflix streaming video, it's gotten overly warm. Never had that happen before. So I did a chat with Apple support people because it's still under Apple Care warranty and all. And they asked me a bunch of questions and so on and so forth. And then he said, well, since you haven't got an alert on your phone, or I mean on your iPad, popping up and saying that your device is too hot, then it's probably fine. You have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, the iPhone and the iPad can get warm if the radios get a lot of use, and the radios can get a lot of use because you're using Wi-Fi, and the Wi-Fi signals is weaker than it should be, because that actually causes the radio to use more power rather than less, because if it's got a strong signal, it doesn't need to keep on asking to be synced up. And it can also get warm if you're in areas with weak cell signals, if you're out driving your car, for example, because it seems antithetical, but your cell phone works best if Wi-Fi is also active, even if there's no Wi-Fi signal. And that's because when occasionally it comes up with a Wi-Fi signal, it uses that to help triangulate the GPS and resync things and so on and so forth. And when Kathleen and I were coming across country, when we moved out here from the East Coast, we were navigating using my iPad, using Google Maps. And in the middle of the Arizona desert one day, it just said, I've had enough, I'm overheating, and turned itself off. But the iPad itself was still fine. It didn't hurt it. It saw that it was over hot and it turned itself off. The inside of the car wasn't hot, it was the iPad itself. And that's because there was really no signal at all. And that night when I was in the hotel, I was looking up what could possibly have caused that. And I found out a trick to Google Maps, which I hope to remember to tell people about today. and that is that you can download a Google map for an area. It'll download the image files it needs for the wet map, so that as you go on a route and it doesn't get a Wi-Fi, it doesn't get the signal, it can still have the maps available. It doesn't need to pull them via it uses the GPS in the phone or the iPad to know where it is, and it moves you along even if you don't have a cell signal. And that, among other things, reduces the power consumption, and it doesn't make it doesn't cause the overheating when you're doing that. That won't help you when you're streaming, though. When you're streaming, usually if it's getting warm, it's because it keeps on trying to either stabilize the signal or it keeps on asking for a resync. There's when you have they've done a lot of studies because we've been making motion pictures for some time. The thing that will upset people more in watching a movie than anything else is if the sound is off. If the sound is off by something like 1/8 of a second, it'll just drive audiences nuts. And so when you see something on a newscast and the news reporter's in Turkey and the sound isn't synced up with his voice, it's just very difficult for you to follow a story. So they invented this thing called QoS. It stands for quality of service. And it's just another type of packet that they send along in an audio stream or a video stream saying, I should be here, I should be here, I should be here, I should be here, to tell the rest of the packets that are following where current reality is, as opposed to where the packets might be coming in. And if the QoS gets too out of sync, that can cause overheating of the computer. And it also will, that's where the video will start stuttering, because the Mac, the software is trying to resync up to reality. And so it'll start stuttering because it's trying to do a resync, and that will cause a reheat as well. So the fact that it was streaming doesn't surprise me. And it's hard to say whether it was Wi-Fi or cell, because I don't know if she has a cell in it, but it's usually because of the wireless signal. It's not necessarily that your wireless signal isn't strong. It just means that where she was at that particular time, it was having trouble, and so it keeps on. Does a lot more work because it's asking for the same thing over and over and over again. And you may not actually know it in the video feed itself if it does it fast enough, but if it can't, then that's when you start to notice that it stutters. But it doesn't surprise me that happens. And if it gets too hot, the iPad will shut itself off. Your phone will shut itself off as well. And then
it's never got that hot, but I told you this around our last meeting sometime, that there's something weird going on with the sound's signal. It'll sometimes go dead, even though the lights on the modem and the router don't show any interruption.
Yeah, that's because the routers have it's a different thing. Is called an ARP. It's not really a quality of service thing, but routers send out things called ARP packets. And if the TCP/IP, which is what the internet runs on, I don't ask what the TCP/IP stands for. They send these packets of information. Each packet has addressing information, and then it has content, and then it's got this thing at the end that says, I'm the end of this packet. So it sends out multiple bytes, and it says, I'm the start of the packet, I'm this long, I was sent at this time, I'm packet number such and such, and then at the end, after the date, it says, I'm the end of the packet. And when they are received, the TCP/IP is designed to be received out of order if necessary, because it was designed as a protocol that could be used in case of nuclear attack, and you wanted to have reliable communication. So even if your message is chopped up into all these pieces, it'll still assemble itself in the proper order because they're all numbered. And when you're talking with text, which is what they were originally worried about when they came up with this in the 1960s, that's fairly easy. But when you start adding things that are really big, that becomes very difficult. And what a lot of people don't realize is that video and sound and everything that's sent over the internet is really just text. So it sends out this stuff in these 8-bit bit bytes, and it breaks it up into segments. It assembles them in these packets. It sends out the packets. The packets are numbered, and then when it comes in, it reassembles them. And if they start to get out of order too much, the routers start sending out these ARP packets. And I call them C-line packets, because if you're explaining something to someone, you say ARP packets, and they think you're pretending to be a C-line. But the ARP packet says, hey, I'm here, I'm here. And it's basically a signal to the other routers to say, hey, I'm here, pay attention to me. And then the other packets start talking to each other and get back in sync. And so it's a complex dance. And the routers can get out of sorts too. And the router will say, I can see things, I can see other routers. I'm sending ARP packets back and forth. So I'm fine. Doesn't mean your data's slowing, because that's due to whatever Comcast is doing with their signal. So the routers might be able to see each other, but your signal can still be posed. It's complicated, but I don't even want to speculate on why some of this stuff from Wave works the way that it does. I spend a lot of my time being very disgusted with them. I'm a Wave subscriber as well. And they're just things that they do that are unbelievably stupid. For example, one of the things that they do, it's common for a lot of spammers to send out to send out email with a bunch of blind CCs. About once a week, Wave decides that for whatever reason, any message you send out that's got multiple blind CCs, even if it's legitimate, it'll just bounce them all. So if you send it to a Wave address, it'll just bounce them all. So sometimes when I send out the smug messages, we've got about 15, 20 people who only have a Wave address. I'll send it out to everybody, and everybody gets it except for the Wave subscribers, and it bounces every single one of them. They're legitimate addresses coming from a legitimate address. I'm even a Wave subscriber, but it bounces every single last one of them. And it's hard not to say that's just utter incompetence.
I've run into that in other states when I've sent out something with blind CC, a list of, I've run into the same thing with people who have the equivalent of a Wave address with an ISP in other states, which it'll just bounce. It'll either bounce them, or what's worse, in my opinion, is it'll just automatically shuffle them into the junk folder or the spam folder, and they'll never know they have it, because most people don't ever look at those folders.
Yeah. So, I'm not happy about it, but I don't really have there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah. Well, I was hoping that no bad overheating problem had happened, because we're hoping to trade that back in to get an M3 iPad here assuming they come out with those this fall. I didn't want it to melt before then.
It probably won't. It's probably just that it was spending a lot of time requesting the same information over and over and over again. And
Penny Lawrence says the reason it overheated is because you're watching those South Korean equivalents of the Hallmark Channel. And if you just quit doing that, it'll be fine.
Speaking of which,
or something like that.
My spouse is in the hospital right now, and she was in the ER until like 3 a.m. And she was asking, he says, why aren't you in bed? And I said, I'm watching the Sweden-Spain game in New Zealand. And she said, I don't care. You should go to bed. But, it was difficult for me to go to sleep when she was in the ER. So.
Well, I hope she's doing better today.
She's still in the hospital, so. Nothing I can do other than pray. Anyway, do we have computer questions? Not involving Wave, which tends to sometimes lead to me using bad language.
I sent you a suggestion about fonts. Did you get that?
I don't think I've seen that.
Well, anyway, it was a suggestion for a meeting topic involving font management on the Mac and on the iPad and iPhone.
I don't see that. I'm looking at my email. I don't see anything on fonts. Did you send that today?
No, yesterday or the day before. It might have been, I might have replied to your announcement about the meeting.
Yeah, I don't.
Well, anyway, it doesn't really matter. But I had that idea and wanted to send it because, you know, in the days when you could buy font, when Adobe was a font foundry, an electronic, when you could buy fonts and so forth, those were all type 1 PostScript, I think. And then, you know, so I invested some money in buying fonts from them, some of which I really liked. Like they had an Adobe Garamond Expert family, which had all kind of cool stuff in it. But then, you know, now nobody uses type 1 fonts and they won't work on the new Mac and so on, as far as I could tell. And
Oh, yes, they can.
they can.
I still use type 1 fonts on the machine in front of me. What is complicated, though, is that Adobe says that their future updates to PostScript will not support type 1 fonts. So when that takes place, that will present some problems because the Mac, you don't see it, but a lot of the Mac interface that you see on the screen is actually drawn with PostScript. Apple has it licensed from Adobe. And if Adobe stops supporting type 1 fonts, that will definitely be a problem. But no, there's a font that I like to use in a lot of announcements and such called Hiroshige, which is a serif font that looks a lot sort of like Garamond, but the serifs have a slight hint of being a brushstroke, just like the painter Hiroshige. So it doesn't look as clunky as a lot of those things that are supposed to look Japanese. It's just kind of a hint. And it was developed for a book on Hiroshige. And I really like it. And I'm going to have to buy the new, I can't remember the format that Adobe's using right now. There's really nobody else out that makes that font. So I'm just going to have to buy it at some point. But that problem hasn't existed yet. But in terms of how to get them to show up, it is kind of a pain. For example, when I use Adobe Illustrator can't see the fact that I have Hiroshige. It can't see that I have it installed, but Microsoft Word can. And that just is bizarre.
Yeah. I lost a number of fonts because I got them from like independent type foundry people and can't find them. I mean, I can't find I'd buy whatever would work, you know, without going through gymnastics to make it work, but I can't find any of them anymore.
Yeah.
It was annoying that I bought all that stuff from Adobe and then, you know, they changed formats or whatever. And I bought them, but when they updated them, I would have to buy them again.
Yeah.
You know, instead of like paying some lesser fee for an update.
Yeah. I understand the fonts are getting kind of funky in terms of buying fonts anyway, because so many people out there will just get free fonts, or they'll get like, you know, 5,000 fonts for $10. And you can go onto the Apple App Store and get just bundles of fonts. And the problem with them is a lot of them are very poorly made, but you don't know that until you're trying to do something and you really want the kerning to be just right, and you find out that it'll overprint or do other stupid things. This one friend of mine, he has this really, really bad font that he like, and just badly made font that makes blots and so on and so forth. And he uses it to write me fake ransom notes when he's trying to get my attention and I haven't been paying attention. So send me fake ransom notes using this font that basically says, pay attention.
You know, one of Apple's first fonts was, I can't remember what it was called, but that's what it was. It was, remember that? It was a
Yes.
ransom note like font.
I think that was San Francisco.
Maybe.
They-
Anyway, in the note that I sent you, I included a link to an article, which I think was on Apple News. I can't remember, Cult of Mac maybe. And it mentioned some program like iFont, or I'll find it, which is something that would help install fonts like the Google fonts, you know, that are in if you use Google Docs.
Well, Apple has a really good font utility that's built in, but there are some other ones as well. I don't know if it's about iFont, but I think that's a good topic, but I don't see the email.
I'll find it and resend it to you.
Yeah, sorry about that. And it's 7 o'clock.
Did you
Hello,
make a
Madam
sign in?
President.
Hello there. Welcome, everybody. Boy, we have a really small group today.
Yeah, I think everybody melted.
Probably. Well, welcome, everybody. I hope you're staying nice and cool. And there's nothing to report for the Treasury, nothing in, nothing out. So it stayed status quo. I forgot to ask during the Q&A. Lawrence, can you tell me what is the advantage? Or so when you're using photos on the phone, you can now click on a picture and hold a little bit and you can copy and it'll just take the people out.
Yes.
Can you tell me what the benefit is? And when you say copy, where does it copy to?
It's not actually copying, it's doing a masking. And what it's doing is it takes whatever you're holding down, it takes that to be the subject and it masks out the rest. And a mask is, it's from, the term comes from how you used to develop film. When you had black and white film and you were filming it, you were developing a dark room, you develop things. There's a sheet of paper, you shine it through this glass, and by adjusting the amount of light going through various parts of the glass, you can either develop parts of the film or underdevelop parts of the film. And quite often to do this, they would do this by using a little piece of cardboard or something, and they use it to redefine how much light is striking the paper. But if you wanted to highlight something and get rid of the rest of it, they would cut out a shape and they put that over the film, either over the film to expose the cutout, or they put it over the part that they wanted to keep from being exposed and do the rest of it. That's how they used to do special effects in the pre-computer days. Is they would go frame by frame by frame, and they mask out a part of the screen, and they put a rocket ship in there, and then they move it very gently every frame. And it used to be incredibly tedious, and now you can do that on your iPhone. So it's really, really cool, but it's called masking. And it's not really copying that. You're selecting it and say mask this, and then you have to paste it into something else in order to create a new picture.
Can you give an example of like where you would paste something like that?
Well, I did that a couple months ago when I was talking about cheap photo editing, and I was using previews to do that, because you can do the same thing in preview. So you copy out the subject of one thing and then you paste it into something else, and when it comes in, the background is transparent. So you can have a picture, you can have a statue of a dinosaur and then a picture of a 3-year-old and put it on top of the dinosaur. Now you have a 3-year-old riding a dinosaur. So it's 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 a practical thing to do, but it's also sometimes if you just don't want, you see your mother right now, look at the background around her, it's perfectly white. That'd be great for something like a passport photo. Well, you can do that now, even instead, you ignore the rest of the house. You can just take her photo, get rid of the wooden frame and for the door and so on and so forth, and just have that as a passport photo. Except that the passport company, the State Department doesn't like that, because at that point you're altering the image and they won't accept altered film. But that's the sort of thing that you can do with a mask, so that you just focus on one thing and not have a bunch of clutter. And it's quite popular right now, because you're there, you have a picture of you and your boyfriend, only you dumped that boyfriend, but you still like this picture of you in front of the Eiffel Tower. So you're in front of the Eiffel Tower and just make the boyfriend disappear.
Got it. Okay.
That's pretty cool.
But it's called masking, and it's supported on the iPhone, iPad, and on the Mac as well, with the current operating systems. Several people said that they couldn't follow the instructions I had for doing masking in the session on photos, because they were running Mac OS 10.9 or something like that. And it won't work on that. It's a fairly recent thing.
My one last question is, did that computer find a home that the person was giving away?
The answer to that is complicated. There is a person who wants it, and the donor would like to give it to him, except that the person who wants it is making things complicated. So,
okay. Well, if they change their mind to who they're donating, I don't know if it was like alphabetical or who came in first, but my dad's still interested in it.
yeah, it's not my choice. I'm just kind of the
Mediator. I get it.
yeah.
Okay, that's all I had.
Okay. Anything else before we start? The original question for the discussion of maps was Steve's, because he wanted to know if he could do some things in Apple Maps that you can do in Google Maps. And I looked, and you really can't do that, because Apple Maps has a very different focus. And to explain this, I will start by saying I know a lot about maps. I used to work for a map making agency. National Ocean Service makes all the nautical charts for the United States. And they used to make all the aeronautical charts for the United States, which they still do, but now the FAA gets credit for that. And so I know lots of geographers and cartographers and so on and so forth. When Google Maps first came out, it was just hot stuff. It was not the first. Microsoft had something called TerraView or something like that. This was late 20th century stuff. And you get these black and white images of the Earth, and later on they added color and so on and so forth. And it was kind of patchy in terms of the coverage. And it was basically, they made a mosaic of the Earth using a bunch of these photographs. And when that existed, and when Google Maps first came out, all the maps were bitmapped. And by that, it's like a picture on your phone, a whole bunch of pixels. And the good news, bad news is, the good news is they figured out a way to mathematically tile this stuff together, so they didn't have to send you the entire map at once. They sent you however many tiles you needed for whatever scale that you wanted. So if you were looking at something big scale, they'd send you one large tile. If you were looking at something smaller scale, they'd have to chop it up and give you parts of it. And it worked quite well given the limitations of the time. When Apple Maps came along, Apple did something radically different. Apple Maps is based upon polygons. And if you think about it in terms of geometry, how many points do you need to draw a circle?
3.
2. you need the center, the dot to find the center of the circle, and then you just need one other point, and that's the radius, and you just spin it around the circle, spin it around the origin, you end up with a circle. So you only need 2 points. And with polygons, you basically can draw almost anything with 3 points. And depending upon how big the triangle is, and if you want to add an extra point, then you can get a square, but it takes very few, it takes very little information. And you can take almost anything and turn it into a whole bunch of polygons. And that's what Apple Maps did. And the advantage is that by sending just the coordinates and having your phone build the map out of these very few things, you could send a lot of data that looked like a map using much less of your phone data. So if you were navigating using Apple Maps, the amount of data that you used on your phone was just trivial compared to Google Maps. With Google Maps, you could burn through your entire data plan on a trip going downtown, back in the days when you only got 50 megs of data a month. Just going downtown, that could burn through everything you had. But with Apple Maps, it wouldn't, because it was much, much more efficient because you're sending much less data. And then the phone itself builds the map on the fly using these very few data points. The bad news was that Apple Maps wasn't particularly accurate. There were lots of tales about people being sent the wrong way down the one-way streets, or being told to turn down streets that that didn't exist anymore, or that down highways that hadn't been built, and so on and so forth. All kinds of horror stories. But Apple got much better, and actually fairly quickly. And they did that by purchasing companies that provided a whole bunch of data, surveying companies that went out and surveyed things for states and federal agencies and real estate agents and whatnot. Whole bunch of people who have geographic data, and Apple bought a whole bunch of those companies. And so today, Apple Maps is considered just as reliable as Google Maps. But in terms of the emphasis upon the maps, it's quite different. Google Maps is based upon the web. And anything you can do in Google Maps, it shows up on your phone, but it'll also show up in your browser and your computer. On the computer, if you're actually trying to get directions to go from here to Port Angeles, probably not as useful, because as soon as my computer gets to the limit of my Wi-Fi, the map stops working. Whereas on your phone, it's much more useful. So what you can do with Google Maps seems limited if you only consider it the fact that it's using web technology. But because it's using the web technology, you can do things that you can't do with Apple Maps. Apple Maps is designed to be used by the user. The person sitting there looking at their Mac screen, the person sitting there looking at their phone or their iPad, they're using the Apple Maps, and it's designed to be interactively used by that person. With Google Maps, though, you can share them, and you can share them easily. You can make a map of something, and you can just send the URL to somebody, and when they get that URL, it goes and reproduces that map on their screen, whether it's a computer or a phone or an iPad, doesn't make any difference. So the purpose that they have is quite different. And because of the technology that's designed, the Apple Maps also can do some things that Google really has trouble doing. If you've ever used Apple Maps in Seattle, it'll actually have 3D portrayals of a lot of the buildings and so on and so forth. And in San Francisco, it'll even tell you which subway, in San Francisco and DC, it'll tell you which subway exit to leave the area. And Google really doesn't do that. You kind of come to the top of the escalator in Google and it says, beats the heck out of me. It doesn't really know what direction you're facing or anything like that. You have to walk a block or so before it reorients itself. And so they have a different purpose. But having said that, there are a lot of things that are worth demonstrating with both of them. And I'm going to start off with Google Maps, because I've been using Google Maps since before it existed. Since I worked for a mapping agency, one of the first things they did is they contacted National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Geodetics no, that's National Geodetic Survey belongs to NOAA. The map making part that's part of the Department of Interior, which I can't remember right this second. They contacted us. We got to use it for 6-8 months before they actually made it into production. So I got to play with it from a fairly early age. And I'm going to share my screen so that I can show you some things. And the first thing I'm going to do is move this menu bar that you can't even see, so it's not in my way. Okay. You can go to Google Maps just by typing in Google Maps, and it comes up with a map, and you can say, I want to go to Squim Post Office, and it shows you where it is on the map. And then you can say you want directions, and it says, where are you starting from? I'm starting from Bremerton, Washington. And I say, go, and it draws me directions, and I can say, send directions to your phone and give you things. And if you press this details, it gives you the actual parts that you need to do. So you go down these little sections and eventually you end up there. And it says, take 1 hour and 8 minutes right this second to get to Bremerton, in spite of the fact that they're doing this construction around Gardner. See this nice little red and orange part here? The good news, bad news about Google is that it's pretty good at doing its thing. It's a little bit bad when it comes to things like if you wanted to go from Kingston over to Seattle, sometimes it's really bad about things like ferry schedules and such. It tries really hard. On the iPhone, and I don't have my iPhone set up to do that, one of the things you can do is you can actually ask it to download the map to your phone, so it doesn't have to constantly go out and ask for new data when you are doing something. And the best way to do that, say you want to do a whole weekend around the Olympic Peninsula and you're not sure of your cell signal, you frame the entire Olympic Peninsula on your phone, and then you go to the option, and I don't know offhand where it is, but it's one of the options that you can pick, and it'll download that entire map, and it'll keep it for something like 3 weeks or 6 weeks or something like that. That's really useful if you lose your cell signal, because that way it's not constantly going out and having to, you basically stop moving until it can grab the next piece of map as you're moving around the peninsula. Apple does this quite a bit different because it's vector based. And so Apple just assumes that where you're moving is in an area, and it goes out and automatically grabs the data from front and behind and to the side of where you are. And because the data is much, much more compact because it's vectors, it doesn't even bother to ask you that. It just does that automatically. So you can wander around for quite a while without any cell signal, and Apple Maps is perfectly happy with that. The Apple Maps is using the GPS chip inside of your phone. Your phone, depending upon the age, also has a barometer inside, so it can even knows your altitude as you're moving around. And with that, it's perfectly happy to say, okay, you've gone 1,800 feet and you should turn to the left now. One thing that Apple Maps does that is really, really handy, if you have an Apple Watch, your Apple Watch will actually vibrate when it comes to telling you whether it's a left turn or a right turn. And I don't really care. There are two different types of signals. I don't bother. I just wait for it to vibrate, and that tells me to pay attention to get ready for the turn. And the reason is that I already know what direction I need to turn. I just may not know when that road is coming up. But if you're going to turn to the, I have a note over here. When it wants you to turn to the to turn to the right, there's a low tone followed by a high tone. So it goes talk tick. And that means turn to the right. And when you're going to turn to the left, it does the opposite. I never remember which is which, so I just wait until I get this double tap on my wrist and it tells me, oh yeah, I should pay attention to the turn coming up. And that's really handy because in my car, I can't really see my phone. It's lying down on the console in front of the me, so I can't see the phone, so I'm not staring at the phone all the time. And having it remind me that I'm going to make a turn is really quite useful. And you can always either set it up to have you speak the directions or not speak the directions. My car does have CarPlay, but sometimes Toyota, in its infinite wisdom, decides that it can't use CarPlay. So if I can't use CarPlay and I want to know what I'm doing, I just listen to the phone or wait for the taps on my wrist. And both Apple Maps and Google Maps work perfectly well for giving directions. One difference that is quite funny is that I have the voice on my phone set to an Australian woman's accent, which normally is not really relevant to anything. But in coming into swim, she says very, very precisely, "You are now entering Sequim," and it just cracks me up every time. But Apple Maps actually pronounces swim correctly. I don't know why. And if I set it to an American accent, and maybe Google would too. I don't know, but I like the Australian accent. So this is Apple Maps, and Apple Maps works pretty much the same on I want this to go away. There's a box that just appeared on me. Apple Maps works pretty much the same way on Mac and PC and so on and so forth. You can also make custom maps. Only to get to custom maps, you say My Maps, Google.com. And in this case, I already have some maps that I created. So I'll show you what the examples are. I live in Sunland North, and Sunland North has a beach cottage that's right here at this intersection. And in order to tell people about it, I made this map in Apple Maps and distribute it to. It's a fairly simple map because that's the only thing it shows. I don't know how they're going to get there, but if they have this on their phone, they can go up here and then ask for directions, and it'll create directions from wherever they are to the beach cottage. Very, very simple one. And you can also make things that are a little bit more complex or just strange. I made this map that shows you the NSA headquarters in Seattle. In this particular NSA, Seattle is not the National Security Agency. It's just some company it calls NSA. But I had this acquaintance who was very paranoid, and he found this place that was called NSA in Seattle. So I went looking for it, and I did find it. But what they do is there's something like National Services or Association or something. They're not spying on anybody. Here is a map that I made in 2015 of a trip that I made with various relatives to various places in Oregon and Washington, and even lists where we happened to go during this trip. And I did this because a lot of my daughter came in from England, and Kathleen came in from Colorado. She was doing something in Colorado. Somebody else came in from Colorado, and we just had this collective map so I could show them the places we had gone and visited. When I was in Helsinki for a World Science Fiction Convention, these are various places that I visited in Helsinki. And so I just did this just to keep my own memory of where we went, because I don't speak Finnish, and sometimes I visited a couple places, but I wasn't actually sure what it was called. So I made the map so I could find out what that thing is supposed to be called. This is a crowdsourced map of World War II battles. It's really quite terrible because most battles aren't covered on it. But if you zoom into here, this is not a battle. It's just that was one of the major ports that they used for the invasion, and the Juneau and Omaha beaches and so on and so forth, and certain battles, the Battle of Bastogne. But most of the battles that took place in World War II are not there at all. And so it's a terrible map, but this is the kind of thing that is crowdsourced. A group of amateur historians actually created this, and I was intrigued with what they did, even if I wasn't particularly impressed with the result. A much more ambitious one is this map showing shipwrecks of World War II shipwrecks. These are ships that were torpedoed or mined or were lost in battle, and it gets pretty dense depending upon where the battle was. Like this area around Guadalcanal, it's called Iron Bottom Sound because so many ships were sunk during World War II. And you can click on one and it'll pop up and it just tells you what that particular dot is. That's a Japanese battleship there. And if we were really lucky and believed in Tinkerbell, there's a photograph of the ship that sank there. You click on another one that's a U.S. destroyer, and this is going to be another U.S. destroyer. Sometimes you can tell just by where they're located as to who they probably are. It has lots of things in it that are strange, though. For example, if I come in here and say USS Nimitz, well, Nimitz is a current day aircraft carrier. It's not in World War II and it's not a shipwreck, and it shows the Nimitz as being in Bremerton. And these are two mothballed aircraft carriers that are in Bremerton. And whoever was making the map apparently didn't quite understand that this was about shipwrecks from World War II, which is one of the problems you have with crowdsourced memory. Is crowdsourced projects is that you can't necessarily be trusting them because of the quality controls. And the other one that it has is it has the RMS Titanic, and the RMS Titanic, yes, it really was sunk at that particular spot, which is in the middle of nowhere, but that was before World War I. It had nothing to do with World War II, right? There were people who, millions of people who were fought during World War II weren't even born at the time that this ship was sunk. So this is an example of a much more complex map. And I had somebody wanted to know how far is where I'm moving from DC, because I lived in the DC area. One of the things that you don't normally notice here is there's a scale in this My Maps. You can draw a line from DC to Squim, and it says it's 2,342 miles based upon where I stuck this. But it's, you can click on another thing and you can actually take the map scale and to go from Edmonton to Albuquerque to Dallas to Ontario, Ottawa, and it's measuring the entire distance. And it's using, you'll notice that the lines are, I don't know if you can actually see the lines, but the lines are slightly curved because it's using the curvature of the Earth. It really is curved, and when you put it on a flat map, it looks like these straight lines are actually curved. But it's got a bunch of tools here. This is a good example of some of the tools that you have. You can move the random map around by clicking on the hand. You can drop a point someplace like Winnipeg. You drop a point there, and you can, once you have that point, you can say that's it helps if you spell it correctly. You can go into different kinds of layers of the map, and if this thing here says base map here, this is what's called a political map here, but you can go with a photographic map, and then you can zoom in and see the ocean. When you see things like this, where you see these strange little features here, we see a bunch of straight lines, or you see grid lines in this, that has to do with how the maps, the bottom of the ocean is mapped. It's done by using a map grid drawn by a ship. So the ship's firing a sonar beam down below, and it's seeing obstructions, and it does this in a grid or in these lines. And so then later on, people say, oh, look, I found plowed farm fields underneath the Pacific. Is that Atlantis? No, it's just has to do with they use the data that we can come up with, and the data that we come up in this case is just sonar waves, and the sonar waves are not they don't have, we haven't mapped that much of the ocean, so it comes across as, you see these looks like plowed fields. But one of the base maps is this photo image, and not the ocean, but the land is actually satellite photos. So this is a mosaic of satellite photos if you're looking at Mount Rainier. And that's one of the base maps. And then if you want to do something like a medieval type map, you can do something like this, which doesn't look terribly medieval here, but you go over the East Coast and it looks more medieval-like. But you can check out the different base maps. And once you've made a map and you've added the pointers that you want to add there, you can send it to somebody else. You can also change the style of the elements, which I don't see how I can do that right this second. You can change the images that it uses for these points, but it's been a while since I've done that, and I don't see that. You can also have different layers, so you can have an overlay showing states that voted for Trump, and then you can go to a different layer and it shows states that voted for Biden, and then a different layer and states that voted for Abraham Lincoln, and all in one map, and send all this all this information off to other people. And it saves it by this address. So once you make a base map, you share it with some people, all you send them is that string, and then they have that copy of that map. So this is my maps, and I've made quite a few of these. This one here, for example, somebody wanted to know, actually, it was a government agency that was giving me a clearance. They want to know all the places I visited or lived in. And so I sent them this map, and you'll see it's heavily biased towards the Pacific, the Atlantic coast, and to the mostly the Northern Hemisphere, just one thing in the Southern Hemisphere. So that's just a quick list of places that I've either lived in for more than a week. Different kinds of things that you can do this. And this is, to get there, you just go to My Maps, Google.com. Now, if you don't have a Google account, one of the first things you're going to have to do is set up a Google account, but that's something that you can do with that. Is My Maps. However, that's not all. There's also Google Earth. And Google Earth, which also works in a browser, there's also a downloadable app, but the downloadable app is kind of buggy on the Mac because they haven't updated it that often. But with the downloadable map, you can do things like, say, swim Washington, press enter, and it flies you there. Going to Auckland, New Zealand now. So Google Earth is really quite useful for things like, I used to use this in teaching quite a bit. It's sometimes astonishing how little people know about their own planet. Like looking at Antarctica, Antarctica looks really impressive here, but what people don't realize is that Antarctica is mostly just an island chain. Most of the stuff that you see that looks like land isn't. It's just ice floating on top of the ocean and on top of the islands. And if the ice cap melt, not only will it flood where we're living, it'll also reveal that this is just an island chain. So you can teach people all kinds of useful things about the world by playing with this. And there is also, with some effort, you can also go to, there is a Google Mars that allows you to play around with Mars, and a Google Moon that allows you to play around with the moon, which is also quite cool. So there is the Google Maps that you use on your phone. There is the My Maps, where you can make your own custom maps. And then there's Google Earth, which is, I will tell you that if you have a slow internet line, you'll hate this, because this is extremely data intensive in terms of what it can do. But some of the things you can do with it are quite extensive. You can have settings. So for example, the map distance, it can be degrees, minutes, or seconds, or you can do it with decimals, which is how modern maps are done. So you have your 98.38 degrees east, and instead of 98 minutes, 98 degrees 6 minutes 12 seconds, which nobody understands how that works. So you can do all kinds of different things. You change the animation speed and all kinds of stuff. So that is reset to defaults. Go away. And I'm trying to make and it is locked up slightly because it's very data intensive. Apple Maps is quite a bit different. So here is the Squim post office and downtown Squim and so on and so forth. But again, you can also get things like different layers. This one right here is a standard layer, but you can also have a satellite view to show things. It's not that if you look up at the top, there's this show you different kinds of settings that you can have for driving, for transit. We don't have much in the way of transit, or the satellite view. The satellite view, by the way, I don't recommend if you're driving, because it's extremely data intensive and you'll burn up your data plan a lot faster. The driving view is particularly useful if you're going to something like Seattle. The 3D view, you notice that you probably can't actually tell that, but the 3D view here is shaded because it's not going to work in Squim because we don't have anything like that. So let's go to Seattle. And I don't want directions. I want to actually go to Seattle. And you'll see that Seattle has 3D, which doesn't seem to do much until you go downtown. And there are some things downtown that'll show up in 3D. And the nice thing is that because this is vector-based, it's just sending shapes. And so it's looking at this tall building here, which I don't happen to know what it is. And it's that's PCC Community Markets or something. Maybe that's the thing at the top of it. But it's just sending the geometric design for it, and then Apple Maps is filling in the rest. So it's not actually sending that shape. It's just sending the outline of the shape, and it's filling it in. And you can wander around Seattle, and I don't know that it has the Ferris wheel. Don't think so.
Lawrence,
Yes.
is there a way that you can tell it you do want to see cafes and restaurants, or you don't want to see it so that it's not quite as busy, or you only want to see the names of the streets? Like, so that it's more pronounced?
Well, one thing is if you get rid of the 3D effect, that definitely gets rid of a lot of the um, information. But in terms of not showing a lot of that stuff, the reason why a lot of that is there is that it's useful in terms of navigation. I'll give you an example from Japan. The streets in Japan are not named or numbered. And I actually, the easiest way to show you.
I mean, sometimes I want to know about Starbucks and about whatever shish kebab place there is, but on other times I don't really care to know that. Oh my, I
This
wouldn't
is-
know how to use a map.
Yes, this is where we used to live. We lived in this section of Kurihama. None of the streets are named, none of them. There's a highway over here that's Highway 134, but none of the streets are named. We lived in 429-8, which is this district right up here. And this house was number 8. The houses are numbered in the order in which they are built. So this 429-8 was our home, and it was the 8th one built on this block. And at the time that we lived there, this whole corner was ours. It was a double lot, but it was only a single building. And since then, they tore down that house and they built 2 houses there. And if you come out here and we look at the map, you can see that it's kind of intense, as you mentioned. So if nothing is, if the streets don't have names, how do people find places? Well, each of these blocks is numbered, and this is the 4 chome, means the 4th district of the neighborhood of Highland. And it says Highland here, but the Japanese actually pronounce it Harando. So we lived in 429-8 Harando. Almost all Japanese are really, really, really good at drawing excellent maps. So you want to know how to get someplace? Somebody whips out a napkin or something and draws you a map. You don't need street names, according to them. You just have to know that it's in this district of Highland, the 4th ward. It's a 29th block, and it's the 8th house. Now, the 8th house can be between the 16th house and the 32nd house. It doesn't, because they're not sequential. You have to kind of wander around the block at least once in order to find it. And 130 million people live in Japan, and this works fine for them. So
How do you know what district you're in?
How do you know? It says right here, 4 chome. Oh, how do you know that? On this major thoroughfare here, there are small little circular signs that say 3 or 4. And if you can look at it and it says 3, that means behind that sign is the 3rd ward, and you look at the other ones, behind that sign is the 4th ward. The blocks are not numbered. You just kind of have to wing it. But the houses themselves have the small plastic plaque on it that'll have, in our case, it said 4-29-8. So you knew you were in the 4th ward, the 29th block, and it was the 8th house. But the signs are fairly small. They're about 8 inches across. So you do have to know what you're doing. But getting back to my question, to your question though, about what if you don't want the restaurants? Well, really, the restaurants and such are really useful in terms of being able to figure out where you are, because they're landmarks. So in this, that's the name of a gourmet food shop there. And if you happen to pass by this food shop, it tells you where you are. It's a necessary piece of navigation. Kathleen was regularly get lost in Japan because she would pick landmarks that were movable. Like, for example, one day she ended up in this place called Uraga, and I will where are we? We're in Clallam County again. Let's go back to Coryhamon. Move it over here. This is Oraga right here. She ended up in Oraga because she missed the turnoff. When the train came in, she didn't get off the train. She fell asleep, and it stopped in Oraga. So she got off, and I said, "Describe where you are." And she said, "Well, I see this big sailing ship." And I said, "Oh, you're in Oraga. I'll go pick you up." And I was there a few minutes later, and she was really torqued off with me. How could you tell by a big sailing ship? Well, the sailing ship I'd done a story on is called the Nippon Maru, and it's their equivalent of the Coast Guard's cutter Eagle, which is this huge sailing ship that they teach people how to be Coast Guard officers. And the Japanese were building a brand new sailing ship for their naval officers and Coast Guard officers, and they were building it here in Oraga. So when she said that she saw it, I knew where it was. Why she got lost coming home one day, though, is that she went past this. She knew to turn at this place that had this green awning. Well, she went by later in the day, and they had rolled up the awning, so the awning wasn't visible. She missed it. So I told her, get some things that are more permanent. Well, then she got lost. About a couple months later, they were in the middle of a political campaign, and she was turning at this trailer that's one political party was using. Well, after the election, they moved the trailer, and she got lost again. So you learn a lot about navigation just by learning how to use landmarks, and signs are essential landmarks. So if you go into Seattle, you might think that that's distracting in terms of the map, but those landmarks are really, really useful in terms of finding out where you are. So if you're going down the street, and there's a and the Apple Maps is showing where you're located, and it shows that there's a Starbucks or something, Onibaba, which is a restaurant here. Oh, we're just passing Onibaba, and we're moving this way, so I must be here. So that you might see as a distraction, but it's actually an essential landmark.
Can you show me how you go from this view map to street view?
You do that. Now you have to remember, I'm doing this on a map, on a Mac. There's this thing that looks like an accordion of a folded map. If I click on that, it says there's the basic view that I have here. There's a driving view, which will tell you, among other things, about streets that are blocked off and traffic jams and so on and so forth. There's a transit view, which is useful for things like the what is this? The link rail and buses and so on and so forth. It highlights those. And then there's a satellite view. I do not recommend the satellite view for an urban area because it's just way too busy. But you pick off these different views from this accordion symbol. So this one here is shows you where you are. This one allows you to pick different types of maps. This 3D one, again, only works in places like Seattle. I should show you San Francisco, because San Francisco is really quite cool.
I'm by Embarcadero, Fisherman's Wharf down.
And you go to the 3D view, and you can see all kinds of cool things, such as this area here has got this cool building, and I'm trying to remember where Coit Tower is. I think it's over here someplace. I guess I can ask it. Okay, Coit Tower. Okay, Coit Tower is kind of odd. It's this odd shaped tower in San Francisco, and people want to know, why did they build this odd shaped tower? It's a monument to the firefighters who fought the San Francisco fire. That is the end of a fire hose. And it's this really big tower in the middle of San Francisco. and you can come up here and, just, it shows you pictures of it and the Coit Tower with downtown in the background and so on and so forth. As you might expect, because Apple's not that far away, San Francisco has a really good detailed 3D map and Transamerica building and all kinds of neat stuff. So
But you can't take that little person and like just put it on the street and say, look around, or street view, or I don't
yeah,
remember.
if you zoom in, like you're down here, there is actually a look around function.
Oh, you just have to be zoomed in far enough.
Yes, because the reason, well, it depends upon what kind of view you want. For example, if I'm zoomed in and I'm at the street view, you can actually, you see, it gives you a kind of a 3D effect for the buildings as well. And you kind of have to be zoomed in, because if you're out too far, it doesn't really mean that much, but you can scroll along here. Now, in this case, because this is actual photographs, you're getting a three-dimensional view of a photograph, this is much more data intensive. If you wanted to spend less money on bandwidth, you'd use this, and you turn off the 3D effect. And then it uses much, much, much less data, because it has to send less data back and forth. I used to live in the San Francisco area, so I'm just really impressed with what they did with San Francisco. San Francisco's good, Seattle's good, San Diego's good, DC's good. Omaha, Nebraska, not so great. You're not going to, Apple just doesn't have a data set that covers that many places. It'll probably be another 30, 40 years before they have a 3D map of Squim. But again, the purpose of Apple Maps is quite different than Google Maps, because it's not web-based. You can share a map with someone. You press this little share button here, and you can mail it to someone, or you can send it to a message or airdrop it or so on and so forth. But it's really not the same as just taking a URL and then just emailing it to like 50 people. No, it doesn't do that. For one thing, maps can also be quite personal. This thing, among other things, tells you that I recently looked for the doctor's clinic in Silverdale, and I recently looked for my old house in Yokosuka, and I wanted to know where Great View, Washington was recently, because a plane crashed there, and where is Paradise Restaurant? I didn't know which Paradise Restaurant people were talking about, so I looked it up. And the Point Townsend Aero Museum, where I spent a happy afternoon a couple of weeks ago. This is all extremely personal information, but it only exists on my phone or on my computer. It doesn't share this with the entire world. Google shares with the entire world. Now, I'm not particularly paranoid about that, but a number of criminals have been caught by people going through their Google Maps history, and they say, you were looking here, we found a dead body here, and you went there, and we have it because because Google Maps says you went there. So it has a very different purpose. Kathleen and I had a Christmas once at the Kitty Hawk United Methodist Church in Kitty Hawk, South Carolina. And if we were to drive there right now, it would only take 1 day and 21 hours driving straight. We like to go to the Outer Banks in the wintertime because nobody else was there. And the trouble is that everything's shut down. So there's a good chance you'll starve to death, but you have this entire huge seashore to yourself. It's quite a thrill sitting in front of an ocean, nice fireplace with a fire going, looking out this big picture window with snow flying at you across the Atlantic. I highly recommend it. But Apple Maps has a very different purpose than Google Maps, and the security on Apple Maps is outstanding. Everything that I do on Apple Maps goes through the Apple security chip. So if I want to share something, it has to be somebody that's in my contacts that I already trust. I can't share it with just anybody. It makes it difficult to share it with just anyone, and that's by design, because your travel is quite personal and quite confidential. But in terms of the question that Steve had for me a couple weeks ago was, is there a way to build these custom maps in Apple Maps like you can in Google Maps? And the answer is no, it's not really designed for that. You can plan a trip and you can ask for a new map and add waypoints and so on and so forth and save that, but it's not you really can't have the same kind of custom maps that you can make with Google Maps. Any questions about any of that? No questions? Does anyone want to venture a guess as to how much Apple Maps is used every day? It's estimated it's used 4 to 6 billion times a day, because pretty much everybody who has an iPhone or iPad has that at least once a day brought up maps to take them someplace. And you can also link maps into things like notes and reminders and a lot of other things on the Mac, so that if you have a reminder that pops up and says that you need to pick up your prescription at Walgreens, it'll actually offer to give you directions, and you tap on that and it'll give you directions from wherever you are to Walgreens to go pick up your prescription. So it's linked into reminders and notes and a bunch of other things. So it's really quite well done, but it has a very different purpose than Google Maps. And Google Maps has a different purpose than Google's My Maps. And Google Earth has a very, very different purpose. Google Earth is much closer to the professional GIS packages that I used at work. You can actually export a map as a bunch of instructions. Like, for example, that one where I showed you the sunken warships. Let's see if I have that. This is what the data file for that looks like. If you happen to know what XML is, this is come on. This is an XML file that has what the data is, and then it tells you where it is located, and the scale, and all kinds of stuff. And then that's how you share the information. You take these files that are standardized and you mail it off to somebody, and it allows them to build something in Google Earth or in My Maps. Just a bunch of standardized stuff. Google invented this data interchange for maps, and it was not in the least bit a standardized thing, but Google made it open, so pretty much all professional packages now take advantage of that. Apple Maps does not, because again, Apple Maps is designed for a very different kind of purpose. Any questions? I know I didn't answer Steve's question, but I hope I told you something about maps that you didn't know before. And anyone want to volunteer to do the topic for the September meeting? Somebody can teach me something for a change.
I'm interested to know.
Yes?
Go ahead, Ron.
Oh, no, I was just making a joke, quote unquote.
Oh, where did you say that was about that, by Kitty Hawk there, the rest of the hotel?
The Kitty Hawk is where the Wright brothers took off, and the Methodist church there, Kathleen and I wanted to go to a Methodist church, and that one was open on Christmas, which is not a surprise. But what we were surprised at, we saw more people in that church than we'd seen the entire rest of the week on the Outer Banks, because the church was pretty much full, and it was just it was a very nice experience. They were nice and welcoming, and offered us cake and all kinds of stuff. It was just a nice memory.
Oh, I
And
thought maybe there was a specific hotel.
oh no, we were at a we rented a they have a whole bunch of I don't know what you call it, resorts. They call them resorts, but you could just rent a large suite, and during the winter time, like in the summertime, it might be like $1,000 a day, and in the wintertime, it could be like $89 a day. So we went in the wintertime. And also this bridge, you can't see it here, but if we go up here, actually I went too far. I guess it is that bridge. This bridge, in the summertime, it can take 12 hours to go across this bridge. It's not a very long bridge, but it can take 12 hours because this is a 2-lane road, and just tens of thousands of people went to go on it. But in the wintertime, most of the places shut down. All the restaurants are shut down. There's one supermarket. Kathleen and I ran out of milk, and our round trip was 140 miles to buy milk that day, because there's only one supermarket that's only open. What you don't quite realize is how long this, from down here to up here, that's quite a ways. And Cape Hatteras is where the tallest lighthouse in the United States is. It's located right there. Mm-hmm. And the USS Monitor is sunk right about here. The Civil War Monitor, it sank while it was being towed right about there. So it's an interesting place. And in the wintertime, there's nobody else there, so it's lovely. Any other questions?
Is there a reason why that island chain looks like that? I mean, is it something that's geographical that
Yes.
happened, or okay?
Yes. The Gulf Stream, which starts in the Gulf of Mexico, all this hot water. The hot water goes out here, and then it starts heading north. And here is where it comes up against a stream that comes of cold water that comes across the Atlantic, and it pushes it in closer to the shore. And it kind of, the convergence plate is right here. So in the wintertime, this is very, very foggy. There are lots of wrecks because this wind is coming in basically from Europe and Africa. This way, the warm water is coming up here, and it creates storms and fog and so on and so forth. And they call this the graveyard of the Atlantic, because back before they had motorized ships, they would just get slammed into the coastline along here. And but the Gulf Stream then comes this way all the way up to Canada, and then across over to let's broaden this out to Ireland, and then comes down this way. If you were to move the British Isles to North America, all of the British Isles would fit within Canada. It's quite far north, but the temperature there in the wintertime is more moderate than it is where we are. And that's because on the west side, there is a cold current that comes down instead of a warm current coming back up. And also the water is much deeper. You'll notice that off the Atlantic coast, see how shallow it is, way, way out there. And off the Pacific coast, it just plummets almost immediately. So it's much colder water. It's coming from the north rather than coming from the south. I had people from the East Coast, they come out to Malibu for some conference or something. They'd always want to surf at Malibu. And so they go out there in their swim trunks and they rent a surfboard and they touch the water and they immediately come back in because they are just astounded how cold it is. If you look at the people who actually surf off Malibu, even in the summertime, they have wetsuits because otherwise they'd freeze to death. But it's just a very different kind of experience. But that's why there's that bank here, is because of that. The cold water coming in and piling up these barrier islands, and the warm water coming in from the south, and that's what creates these barrier islands. Barrier islands are really, really important to prevent floods and tsunamis and so on and so forth. That's one reason why you see this part out here, this little part out here off of Louisiana, that used to be land within living memory. People who are alive today used to farm this area, but it's sinking because of the oil that they're pumping out of the oil and gas that they're pumping out of the Gulf is causing the land to sink, as they pump the oil out, the land subsides because there's nothing under it anymore. And then by the development of the coast here, it's washing away the barrier islands that then wash away the land. There's a good chance that by the year 2050, large portions of New Orleans will be underwater. Because we need those barrier islands and we're eroding them. And down in Miami, it's, to make matters worse, they're building on these. They have these massive, massive skyscrapers that just wall off the coast down here. And they're destroying the barrier islands that you might remember the condo that collapsed a couple of years ago. Most of Florida is limestone. And when they move millions of people in there and they start pumping out the water for the millions of people to drink or to irrigate and grow sugarcane, so on and so forth, they're hollowing out the subsurface. And then if you combine that with the erosion, the land just gave way underneath that building. So it creates problems. But you didn't want me to lecture on oceanography, so I will just leave it at that. There is a reason for those barrier islands, and it's really the spit out here. The Dungeness spit is the same thing. It's has to do with the currents built the spit. The Dungeness spit is several thousand years old. It's kind of a remnant of when the land was higher during the Ice Age, and it built a rocky shoal there that actually this wasn't so much the land didn't sink so much as the oceans rose as the ice melted. And so the spit is just the top of this rocky barrier that was formed by a combination of the glaciers and the currents created the spit.
So over there, where I asked you about up there, was that what's known as the Outer Banks? I mean,
Yes, that's the Outer Banks.
Oh, okay. Okay, heard of them, but I didn't know where they were.
Yeah, we lived in Columbia, which is right up here at the top, and we would drive down there in the wintertime, and we could make it down there in about 8 hours. And it was just, except for this stupid toll road that they have, that Virginia has between Chesapeake and the North Carolina border to basically just get money from tourists. It's a really straight shot with no problems. And we'd spend a week there and we didn't see anybody, and it was quite pleasant after being in the government in the DC area. Kathleen worked for the Pentagon and I worked for NOAA, and every once in a while you just wanted to get away and not kill somebody. So
Mhm.
what are we going to do next month?
Fonts.
Yes. Fonts. I'm willing to talk about fonts. Does anyone else want to talk about fonts? I'm asking because I think fonts are fascinating, but I used to I've run a couple magazines and I used to run a newspaper, and I've been writing things since I was 12. So fonts are fascinating to me, but I can make your eyes glaze over talking about fonts. I know that Steve specifically wants to talk about font management, but
What are fonts?
your name here, this is a serif font. A serif font means it doesn't have little squiggly things at the end of it. So Reinhard, the name Reinhard on the screen right now, that's a serif font. That's a sans serif font. It's French for sans. It doesn't have it, and serif are those little doohickeys at the end of it. The Times Roman, which is what they use for most newspapers and books and so on and so forth, those are serif fonts. And serif fonts have these little squiggly things at the end to make them easier to read at smaller sizes. And Times Roman was developed by the London Times, so they would use less ink and cram more information on a page, and used less paper and less ink because those were their expenses. And so that's what it was designed for. People tend to read words by shape, and a serif font has more shape to it. So you can actually recognize things faster in a serif font than you can in a sans serif font. But sans serif fonts we use all the time for things like stop sign, no serifs, just stop. It's an emphatic. And for simple and short instructions, traffic signs and so on and so forth, we use serif fonts. For the text that you read in books and newspapers, we use serif fonts, and there's a whole science to it. And a lot of it just has to do with the brain. If you are literate, you might remember when you were small, when you were teaching, cat is C-A-T. So you look for a C, and then you look for an A, and then you look for a T. You only do that when you're little and you're illiterate. Once you're literate, you look at the shape. You look at the shape of a word, and you don't read the individual letters anymore. And it's much easier to read the shapes if you use serif fonts than if you use sans serif fonts. So there's a science to this. And a lot of it just has to do with how the brain takes in information. To be literate in Japanese, you need to know 14,000 individual Japanese characters. You need to know 2 Japanese syllabaries, and you also have to know Romanji. And Romanji is Japanese written in Roman characters. And there are some things that you will notice in Japan. If you see the name of a truck on the side of it, it always goes from right to left. And when it's being printed on, like in newspapers, it goes from right to left, not left to right. Well, on a truck, it goes from the front to the back. So on the right side of the truck, it goes from right to left. But on the left side of the truck, it goes from left to right, because it goes from the front of the trunk to the back. So I didn't realize this, and I was trying to read where this bus was going, and it was backwards. And I thought, well, that makes sense, but it's written backwards. No, I was reading the right thing. It's just that their custom is it goes from the front to the back. We do the same thing on planes. The American flag on the tail of a plane always has the stars aiming towards the front, and the stripes are aiming toward the tail. So on one side it'll face the stars will be on the upper left, and on the other side it'll be on the upper right. So there are these kind of conventions that we just use all the time. We don't think about, but somebody did, and those people develop fonts and lay out books and such.
And what about the word ambulance on the front of an ambulance? It's usually
Yes, I was in Japan once, and we had a van in Japan, because the rule of thumb in Japan is that the smaller car has to back up. So Kathleen got this van because it's bigger than most of the small Japanese cars. Well, I was in the van, and because it's a van, it's up higher, and I could see in the back window the word toy. And it scared me to death because it meant there was a Toyota truck behind me, and it was such a big truck that just the middle letters spelled the word toy. And that's interesting. And then, of course, when I actually pulled away, it was Toyota written backwards, but it's still going to have that word toy front or back. It was a sobering experience. Toyota trucks in Japan can be really huge. This was a semi. Any other ideas for next month other than fonts? Because Steve's going to win if nobody has a better idea.
I think it's a good subject too. I used to do a lot of desktop publishing, and as a matter of fact, Seattle Skating Club had that my daughter skated at, hosted a pretty large event, and I got to take all the pictures and make all the guide for it. I can't remember what you call it, but anyway, yeah, that was kind of quite a project.
Okay. I will see you next month.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you.